Hi, Rex here at RW Mods. Welcome to my backyard. It's a beautiful day out. It's a Friday, got off work early to do some videos. It's kind of been my trend the last couple of weeks anyways. It's finally getting nice here. We had some snow less than 2 weeks ago, so there's really nothing beats direct sunlight for doing videos. I struggle sometimes inside with lighting and then video editing and stuff. I think if you've seen the progression, my lighting and my clarity's been a little bit better. Today we're going to go through actually two engines. I'll break it up into two videos. I got a buddy in Hawaii, Shannon, sent me two engines to modify, and we're going to go through each one individually. Been wanting to do an OS based engine for a while now, so we got that. It's kind of a funny story. I actually been doing work for Shannon for many years. The guys in Hawaii race, and they do really, they really into their engines and modified engines and stuff. And a few years ago we were in Hawaii, and my family, or my wife and our nephew that lived with us at the time, were going to go eat dinner with them, and he invited us out, and then my wife wasn't feeling good, so I ended up going myself, and I didn't have a smartphone at the time. My wife did, so he texted me directions and stuff, and I got totally lost getting there, and was probably like an hour late getting there. But it was nice to meet Shannon, and I can't remember his friend's name. So it was neat meeting the customer, way out in Hawaii and stuff. So that was fun. Wish I would have went to the racetrack. We were kind of staying on the other side of the island at the time, and it would have been quite a journey to get over there, so I didn't do that. Lately, last couple weeks especially, things have been really busy. A lot of engines coming in, a lot of emails and stuff. Hopefully, if I lose track of your email, just send another one. Don't get angry and stuff. Please, if you're sending an engine in for modifying or rebuilding, try and put your contact info, your name, your address, and what kind of work you want done. When I do a rebuild, I will send you an email. Usually email works best, on what I feel. Normally a front bearing is kind of a given on most rebuilds and stuff, but what the cost will be and what work needs to be done before I do the work, so you aren't just leaving it up to me and get angry that it costs too much and stuff. I'll give you up front. So and then put your contact info in there and what you want done, because sometimes I get an engine and I don't know if they want it rebuilt or modified, or I had one this week. It took me a couple days to got it apart and stuff, and I had the guy's name written on the bag, but that was it. And I had to search through my emails, and it was only email was only from like 7 to 10 days old, but it was down like 3 pages. I had to use the search function on my email to find the guy's name, to see, to find his contact, to send him a message back. So if you include that name and address and email address and what work you want done, that really saves me some searching sometimes. So we're going to go through this Flashpoint first. So I'll change the camera here, and we'll get it looking down here so we can take this apart. Hopefully the noises from the neighbors and birds and things aren't too bad today. There's a little bit of a breeze, but I think a couple months ago I ended up getting a mic. Hopefully found the audio's a little bit better too. So we're going to go through this Flashpoint first. So into this Flashpoint FP01. First of all, the first thing you see is this neat carrying case. It's really a neat feature. I think we all have spare engines in the bag, in our tote and stuff, and it's nice to have this nice case. Looks nice and stuff. It is a nice added touch to it. So we got the standard kind of OS padded bag there. In the bag, there was some instructions for break-in and stuff. Looks like they have some needle settings. I'm not sure if those are looks like kind of final settings, which is nice. I wish most engine manufacturers know about what you're going to end up with for needle settings. It would be nice if they shared them, especially on the RTR engines, the Dynamites and things. The guys really struggle with the T-Maxes and things like that, having those settings. They always go to what's the factory settings, and it ends up, factory settings that they come with really are kind of useless when it comes to breaking in an engine or even running it. So here's the Flashpoint FP01. It's a nice looking engine made by OS. Actually, I gotta go get my sheet here. Okay, so when I looked online to see how much these sold for, looks like I saw it a few places for $299.99 and $324.99 with a ceramic rear bearing. It does come with that blue sealed OS bearing is probably one of the better bearings around. It has a nice lip seal. They last a long time, keep dirt out pretty well. It is one of the better bearings I've seen. It doesn't say what the carb is on. It doesn't have a marking on it, but it said on the Flashpoint website that it's a 21J OS carb. You can see OS has been doing the third needle, or the spray bar needle, for quite a few years. So I've wanted to do a review on one of these for a while, especially the OS with a non-coated crank. So OS sells one, their XZB version 2, I think should be really similar to this, and those are like $319.99. And I do want to do a review on an Ultimate engine. I see their lower model that looks like it's similar to this is $380. Now they do have two different bore and strokes. The Ultimates do. They have one that's the square stroke also. So it'd be nice to get a couple of those to do a review on. I did have a friend was going to send me one of the Ultimates. I'm not sure which one. So probably we'll dig into this one and get it torn apart here. Okay, we got the backplate screws off. We're going to put the piston up as high as we can get it with the pinch still on the new engine. We're going to take that backplate off. Always make sure you got the piston up at least most of the way when you take the backplate off. That's one thing. One thing I was going to check before I took that off. On some engines, I think OS are kind of that way too, where you get a lot of play. I'm not feeling it. When the screws are in, you get a lot of front to back play. This one's actually pretty good. Some engines really have a lot of crank play, even with the back plate on and stuff. And I sometimes will make sure the piston's up again. On some engines that are really bad, that have a lot of play. I mean, because the back plate is what holds the rod on the crank, kind of. I mean, it's not going to come all the way off because the piston pin doesn't have enough movement, but they will wear the crank a little bit funny. So I like to have, a minimum amount of clearance so that the rod stays on pretty well. So I don't have okay, this will come off. I didn't have a screw in there, and I was wondering if I could get piston or the sleeve out. So we got the sleeve out. Okay, here's the insides of our FP. Let's start with the piston. It's pretty standard that you're gonna find in pretty much most OSs. This is a 16.27 bore, 16.8 stroke, which is probably the most common bore and stroke you'll find. Kind of the original P5 when they came out with it was that, and it's kind of the typical bore and stroke, which it's a good combination. It's one of my favorite bore and strokes. The rod on this does have the dimple, which usually means it's 29.5 millimeters from center to center. The rod bushing to the piston pin. Like I said in my other videos, I'm not really sure why OS, they used to be 30 millimeter on everything, and then when they started more of the square stroke stuff, they went to a 29.5. I'm not really sure why that was. I prefer a 30, but I think it's not really even a difference. It's only 0.5 millimeter, but the sleeve looks pretty typical to what you'll find on a OS speed. In fact, I'm not sure. When I did the timing numbers, when I show you later, I didn't really see much differences in the timing too. So that is the nice thing. I want to say that I'm not super up on my OS engines. I mean, I don't know the differences between all the different, spec 1, spec 2, spec 3. I do know the spec 3 sleeve looks way different than this, but to me this kind of seems like a spec 2. I have actually a spec 2 in my associated RC8 B3.1. So and then we'll go to the crank, and that's the biggest difference between your speed and this Flashpoint or the OS XZB version 2 or the Ultimate. If I haven't had the Ultimate apart, but it does seem like it's based on this. And that's the biggest difference, is this does not have the black DLC coating. It does look somewhat different. I mean, not a whole lot. It does have the silicone fill. That's nice. It's a little bit lighter, drilled out and got the silicone fill. It does have the tungsten weight. So those are some pluses. And we'll get into the rest of that a little bit. So this is the version with the steel bearing. Like I said, it's got the nice OS front bearing. I'd say the block, I mean, other than not being black, it's pretty much what the Speed would have for a block. Most OS engines take the 14 by 25.4 rear bearing, and almost every engine uses a 7 by 19. So if you're looking for new bearings, if you want to, I have no problem with a steel bearing. Run it in your first rebuild, maybe at 3 gallons or whatever. Change it out with a ceramic. They're like $20. So I use Avids, but there's some other brands that are good too. So I guess that's kind of the internals. We'll show the carb here. Like I said, it doesn't have the model number. Some of them have that engraved or etched in there. I don't even see a mark on the restrictor what it is, but it's a OS. Most of their engines have the long low-speed needle. That is one of the nice things about OS, is they make a really nice carb. They tune well. Most OS guys, I mean, that's what they run, and that's what they know, and they are definitely a nice tuning carb. So one reason I wanted to get into this one of these, whether it's the OS version or this Flashpoint or even the Ultimate, is the cranks on these. Obviously it's not quoted, and so therefore it's it's a lower price tag. Like I said, these sell at $319. Obviously it's at least $100 less, or probably usually more than the Speed. So one thing in the past, when I rebuilt these, a lot of times the crank pin's kind of worn out, and the guy said how many gallons you had on it, and it shouldn't have been. I mean, obviously if you have a DLC coated crank, you can go a long time as long as you don't get dirt in there. You can replace rods and bearings and get 20 gallons out of an engine, if it's got the DLC coated crank and it's not been hot or dirt running through it and stuff. So these selling $100 cheaper. It's a little more budget friendly for some guys. But one thing I've found with OS uncoated cranks is they're typically soft. Not super soft, but they're softer than, say, a Novarossi or mostly Italian engines. Even like Alpha and Go and some different engines like that, they had maybe not quite as hard as the Novarossi or the Italian engines, but some of the Taiwan engines actually had a harder crank than this. And so I did take it. I took the crank to work. I did a hardness test, and in the hardness test, what it is it takes a diamond tip. Now my phone's going off. I guess I forgot to put that on silent. So the hardness test takes a diamond tip, and it measures how far that diamond tip goes in there to see how deep, or to see how hard it is. So the harder material, it won't penetrate as deep, and that can check just a surface hardness, because you have something that's heat treated throughout, or you have something that's just a surface hardness. Now a surface hardness is kind of the way to go, because then it doesn't make you can go harder, and then the crank isn't brittle on the inside. So in the past, this is an old OS from the Bluehead V-Spec, and they had the hole drilled in they didn't have a hole in the rod for oil. They had the hole in the crank for the oil, and these typically wore out pretty fast. I mean, it's nothing to see more than 5 thousandths wear on the crank pin. So we years ago I checked hardness on these, and I'm like, it's barely more than mild steel. So when I have done some of the Bluehead V-Specs, probably before the Flashpoint was made, I would find a lot of crank pin wear on some engines. I don't remember at the time if I checked them, but I just attributed it to OS's softer steel. So today I did take this crank and check it. I gotta bring it up on my phone here, because I took some pictures. I don't know if this will show up. So I'm not sure if this will show up. I might have to do it again later, but this is that old OS V-Spec crank, and it's about 34 RC, and that's the hardness. That's a hardness testing standard. This new Flashpoint here was just barely over 40 RC. Hopefully you can see that. And then this is a Novarossi So it's over 50 RC. So OS has made, it's actually close to 52 or 53. So OS has made some gains in the, I think their cranks are better than they were. They're a little harder, but it's kind of in between that old crank and like an over Aussie. Now we got the neighbor dogs barking. Hopefully that doesn't show up in the video too much with the directional mic, hopefully. But so that's one of the downfalls to this motor. Why did I say motor? It's an engine. Motors are electric motors. It's kind of one of my pet peeves. Guys online is talking about motors. If it's electric, it's a motor. If it's a nitro engine, it's an engine, not a motor. So I feel that OS really needs to kind of step up and make their cranks a little bit harder. This engine's not going to wear out in 2 gallons or nothing. It's going to go quite a few gallons, and if it depends on how you run it. If you run, say, a 30-10, a little bit more oil, because the guys that race, and typically 8% oil is pretty common. But if you run 10% oil and you don't run your engines really lean and stuff, you'll get plenty of life. I had a friend that swore by this Bluehead V-Specs, and he got plenty of gallons out of them. But if you're a guy that runs a little less oil, and you run your stuff hard, and you run it as lean as you can for mileage and stuff, you're gonna get more wear out of it, and you're not. I guess I can't predict, but you're gonna get less mileage out of it than you can with like a Novarossi or an Italian-made engine. You're gonna get, or even a Taiwan engine like an Alpha or something. You're gonna get less gallons out of it on the same use. And it does make a difference what vehicle. If you're running this in a truggies typically will wear parts internally faster than I don't know why this dog's barking, but the truggy will wear internal parts, and your engines won't last as long, typically, because of they have increased traction coming off the corner, and that's what the biggest load is. So they'll wear a little bit faster. Plus, the guys will run them. You can, in a buggy, you come off the corner, you can roll into the throttle and stuff, and that buggy moves. A truggy, you got to hammer on it. You got to make it takes a little more to get the jumps. You got to run them, a little more optimum performance. So that's why a truggy engine will typically wear out a little bit faster. But that's just one thing, and I think with the price tag, these being over $300, I don't think they're that good of a value. If you're an OS guy and that's all you can afford, go for it. But I think there's other options in the $300 range with DLC coated cranks, like the FX at, what are they, $375 or something. It's going to last a lot longer than this crank. By no means are they junk. I think they've improved it a little bit, but one thing I do, one of my pet peeves is OS builds lots of engines, and the other thing too, it's got the weighted crank, and it probably costs them more to put a carbide insert in there than it does to have it coated, but that's part of the marketing thing, and it's all brands. I don't know what it costs them to coat a crank, but even if it was $5 or $10, but most engines are $100 more with the DLC coated crank, because that's their selling point. If it was only $10 more, everyone would buy the coated crank, So it is kind of a marketing thing, and I don't really hold that against them, because they have to sell engines, and they have to make a profit. That's one thing I kind of thought with the FX engines. They had a 5-port with the uncoated crank. The one I did a couple of reviews on it. Still got it in my truggy and stuff. They had a good hard crank, and that thing I ran it 2 seasons. I don't race a ton, but 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 what I was getting to is the FX. They had the $375 5-port or the 200 and what was it, like 210 or 220. They sold the uncoated version without a ceramic bearing too, and so I think their profit margin on the DLC coated crank engine was better, because it didn't cost them over $100 to coat that crank and the ceramic bearing. So I think if a company like OS, even this Flashpoint or OS, if they built an engine like this and it was $150, they wouldn't sell very many of the $500 engines. Or if they built a lower price engine with the DLC coated crank. So there's some games they have to play, and it's all in manufacturing and price, demand and such. So this is the head button. It's looks pretty typical to what they have on the Speed. I don't think there's any differences on that. The head, it looks like it's kind of bead blasted finish, but pretty much typical to what the Speeds, that at least the standard head Speeds have and stuff. So pretty good. The backplate, they seem to use more of a cast material, or some other manufacturers use more of a billet stock for theirs. Maybe kind of a shinier thing, the cast, which is not a bad thing really. Some engines have a coated backplate, which maybe doesn't wear quite as much, but one thing on OS is the backplates never really fit that tight. The O-ring seal, like this one doesn't. This one actually seals decent right now, but it seems like when I rebuild a lot of OS, that backplate doesn't have much friction there. And I'm not a big fan of silicone or sealing engines, but OS backplates, if that does fit kind of sloppy there, I typically like to have a little bit around, just on the edge, not down in the engine at all. So another thing too, like OS come with a little lighter pinch than some engines, which good break in. But one thing about OS is if you get an OS engine hot, I'm talking like 260 to 270 range or above, they typically lose their pinch more than some other engines. I'm not 100%. I heard some people say that they thought it was because of the taper in the sleeve. They ran a little different taper and stuff, but my feeling is that the piston material, just like in full-size race cars, you have different grades of aluminum, and some expand more than others, and the hyper eutectics and stuff basically it has like a silica in there. If you some engines, like an Alpha engine, you take it apart, it's not as shiny as this. It's got some almost like a little bit of texture looking to it, and I believe they use a lot of silica, which is like a hyper eutectic. It's almost like a glass or a sand in. But typically, when I used to build 1-to-1 engines, you wanted that for less expansion of the piston, and I think OS, the OS pistons tend to expand a little bit more in higher temperatures. So an engine, when it's 260 degrees, the piston's much hotter than that. So my feeling is they lose their pinch a little bit because the piston expands and wears into the, when you get them a little too hot, they will expand a little bit too much. That's my philosophy. They expand a little bit more than other brands, and then you'll lose your pinch. OS typically run with a little less pinch. No mechanical pitch, because I have guys send me engines, and it doesn't have any pinch. Well, if it doesn't have any drag with the plug out when you turn over an engine, that doesn't mean it's bad. I feel for, if you grab the clutch and give it, and it has a good pop at the top, like it rolls over center and then just pops back, and that's that's usually when an engine is still good. Maybe without the plug-in, you don't feel any resistance. That's kind of when an engine's kind of in its sweet spot is when it doesn't have the mechanical pinch. So it is a little bit of a learning curve there, and you do have to kind of have some experience in that area and stuff. But OS typically will lose their pinch, and it's not a big deal. They're great running engines. I have one in my buggy, but that's one of the downsides to an OS. If you get it too hot, it can lose its pinch, and you can just send it to me, and it's $15 plus shipping, and you're back going again. So it's not a huge deal. In most engines, you have to, at least when you do your first rebuild after a few gallons, I'll resize the sleeve. So and that's, I don't know, some guys ask about resizing and stuff. That's basically kind of just squeezing all the way around evenly to renew the pinch at the top and the compression. So it's, guys typically ask, well, what, how long does that last? It doesn't last as good as new and stuff. And actually, I feel it does last as long as it did originally, barring any dirt getting in the engine or anything like that. So I just thought I'd bring that up. That is one of the things. It's not a huge thing, and guys that run OS love OS, and that's what they know that. And some guys don't have any problems, but some guys have to send their engines off and pinch them once in a while. So it's not a big deal, but I thought I would mention that. It does seem like I'm kind of coming down on OS, and I'll probably get some haters for this, but I mean, like I said, I have an OS Spec 2 in my buggy. I like the way they run and stuff, and diehard OS guys just love their engines, and I'd run this engine no problem, So it's not that I don't like OS. I think there is a couple things they could improve. The hardness of the crank on the uncoated cranks, and the do some experimenting with some different aluminum grades, but that's about the only flaws I have with those. So I don't really remember the numbers of the carbs, but there's one of the carbs on the newer engines. I'm not sure what the numbers. There is one that kind of guys have trouble tuning, and we're talking professionals have trouble with tuning and stuff. I know one of the NNRC, the No Name RC podcast, JQ did talk about the carbs in one of the carbs, and he put a different carb on the engine, and it ran like a new engine. I think that is the smaller bore. I'm not sure. I did some OS engines had a smaller bore all the way through. Typically OS and carbs had a pretty big bore, like pretty close to 9 millimeters all the way through. And I think the one that they're having problems with is a smaller bore all the way through. I'm not sure. I'm not 100% on that, so I'm not going to say the numbers and stuff, but there is that on some of those too, and all it really takes is just a different carb on it. So we'll go through the timing numbers of this Flashpoint. So like I said, it was a 16.27, 16.8 born stroke. This was the non-ceramic FP01. So the blowdown was 44 degrees. The induction open was 148, induction closed 64, for a total of 212. That's actually pretty good numbers. By comparison with this was a Spec 2 speed I did quite a while ago. It's 45 blowdown, which is a little bit higher exhaust port. 152 induction open, 65 induction close, for a total of 217. So this crank has a little bit less crank timing than the speed. Now if you were to put a speed crank in this engine, the numbers would be closer to this. I'm not sure exactly, but what we're going to do with this one is do that. So that is the nice thing about this, is your crank wears out, you can just I mean, the brand new price on the speed cranks are probably pretty expensive, but you could find an old speed or one that blew a rod or something and put a DLC coated crank in, drop right in, and go. You got to be careful. I mean, make sure it's the same bore and stroke, and there are some differences. They did change, I think, the crank pin on some. There is some differences. You can't just throw any old crank in there. You have to kind of do some checking and make sure that it fits too. So this crank basically just has just a little bit less timing, which is what I came up with a few years ago when I rebuilt a Bluehead V-Spec. So that's it on this Flashpoint. Thanks for watching, and appreciate your feedback and all the comments and stuff. So thank you.